Welcome to the Green 19 podcast. I'm Dominique Yates. I'm joined by Ryan Wood and Tom Silverstein. Guys, it's good to see you once again. We have the band back together. So we were able to take a couple of weeks and get a feel for how things might play out, or how things at least will look. And I was able to catch my breath a little bit. But before we dive into some things, Ryan, the grades are on the way. I think with the first one dropped on this Monday. So just to give us an early sneak peek on what that process is before we dive into the pod.
Well, it's basically I lock myself in a cave called my office for a month and come out with grades after hours of film review, discussion, writing, tabulating, just looking at everything. A lot of everything's more than once. Quarterbacks dropped today. I found it fascinating. It's very, very clear that if you keep Jordan Love's jersey clean, he is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. The problem is he had his most throws, passing attempts under pressure in 2025 of his first 3 seasons as starter, and it points right to the offensive line, right? I mean, his pocket presence is a strength of his game. He mitigated mistakes under pressure, only 4 interceptions under pressure this season. But he didn't make a lot of plays under pressure, only 1 touchdown under pressure. You keep his jersey clean, 26 touchdowns, 2 picks, one of those being the Grant Delpit pick in Cleveland. So it's not like, 2 picks is good. One of them swung a game. But a 122 passer rating, clean pocket, that's elite. If you keep his jersey clean, Jordan Love, and we saw this with Brian Gutekunst season wrap. One question about Jordan Love, of all the questions with this team, one question about Jordan Love, 27 and a half minutes into that press conference. This is a franchise that's in a great place with the quarterback, but also a franchise that hasn't been able to win at the highest level despite that. And that's where they got to figure things out this offseason.
Well, to take it from the Jordan Love comment, it's kind of a good segue into, because of his play, maybe is a big reason why Matt LaFleur is still the head coach of the Packers. So we can kind of take it from the extensions. That was something that we were tracking for a while. And at policy, you can say his first big decision as president of the Packers, he decided that Brian Gutekunst, Matt LaFleur, Russ Ball, that trio needs to stay intact. So Spoon, just, what were kind of your thoughts on, those extensions, and just thoughts on how Ed Policy went about that process?
I don't think there was anything complicated about it. I think he was already decided immediately that he was going to sign them all to contract extensions. I don't think there was as much mystery as maybe it seemed, given that there was a lot of silence and not much, action going on during the week that tried to find out what was going on. And I think he, for whatever reason, he felt that they were okay with that way things were going. And, that is his decision, and it's based on his experience with those 3 guys. And it'll be really, we'll find out. We'll find out whether he's right about it. There's some pros to it and there's some cons to it. It does give Jordan Love and that offense some continuity. It doesn't look like he's going to change anything on his offensive staff in terms of bringing in like a different type of, system, or even I'm someone who's can add something to his system. And I think, on the downside, he's had 7 years and there haven't been any modern day coaches who've won Super Bowls after 7 years. They've all won them before. I think 6 was the longest it took a coach to win a Super Bowl. I think that was Andy Reid with Kansas City. So if you're going to win a Super Bowl, you win it early on, as Mike McDonald showed. So I don't know. There's pros and cons to it, and we'll find out after this year and maybe the next.
Ryan, you want to touch on the extensions?
Yeah, first, Spoon, I think that we were in agreement leaving Chicago that this was the right time to make a change. I'm curious for you, and I'll give my side too. Is that still where your mind is, or has given a month of reflection, or as your mind changed on whether or not this was the right time to make the coaching change?
I still think it probably, if they were going to do it, this is the time to do it, because I didn't anticipate there being 10 openings at the time. And there were a lot of coaches out there who, we've seen some got recycled, but then there are a lot of new faces, a lot of people taking chances on some young coaches, up and coming coaches. And, I always felt that the Packer job was really good, and that they could have probably gotten John Harbaugh if they wanted to. I think they honestly could have. I think they could have hired an up and coming defensive guy. It's all a crapshoot, and you have to figure out, you have to judge what's available and whether you're actually making a better move. But what probably the red flag to me is, okay, you could bring LaFleur back, and he's a good coach. We all know that. But where is the change? What is the change that's going to push them over the top in terms of coaching? And really, we haven't seen anything. All we've seen is a replacement for Hafley, and we haven't seen anything dramatic on offense and special teams. And so really, they're just rolling the ball back out and going with what they got, is what I can tell.
Yeah, that's what's interesting to me about the decision that Ed Policy made, is that he made the decision specifically to avoid change. Like he did not want to change. He valued continuity. I think that the Packers, that they are aware that the resume says that Matt LaFleur has coached 7 seasons here. I think they look at it as year 4 entering 2026 with this team, with this quarterback. I mean, the difference between 2026 Packers and 2019-2020 Packers is night and day, except that Matt LaFleur was the coach. It's really the one through line that binds those two eras together. The fact that they've, two things can be true at once, and I wrote about this. The fact that they are here as contenders after Aaron Rodgers is something of a football miracle. Because I remember thinking 2019, 2020, 2021, my God, reckoning's coming for this franchise. You do not go 3 straight franchise quarterbacks in this league. It does not happen. And there's this precipitous drop that is waiting at the end of the Aaron Rodgers era that never happened. They go immediately right back to the playoffs in year 1 under Jordan Love. He has only gotten better since then. This was his best season in 2025 that he has had. And Matt LaFleur is in the center of that football miracle. Two things can be true at once. Organizationally, you can feel like you owe a debt of gratitude to Matt LaFleur that the clock didn't turn back to 1973. You didn't go back to the dark ages. You have the guy who developed the quarterback to replace Aaron Rodgers. A quarterback developer like that, worth his weight in gold in this league. I mean, that is what every NFL team covets. The Packers have that in Matt LaFleur. But, of course, it's also true that once you have that guy, it's not just enough to win enough games to be a 7th seed and get into the playoffs and be in playoff contention every year. You have to win at the highest level after you develop and establish the guy. And that's what they have in Jordan Love, but it's what they haven't done with Jordan Love. I think that the decision, I mean, you can see the calculus with that policy. Now is no time after Jordan Love's best season to rip out the carpet and uproot the system and put him in going into his 4th year as a starter into something different. You want the continuity, fine. Where have you seen signs that this coaching staff, that this culture that's been built can get it done in January? That's where I don't see it. So now, just because we haven't seen it doesn't mean they won't show it. They'll have an opportunity in 2026. But if it's rinse and repeat and they fail to close out a game in January of 27 in the playoff, you're going to feel like, well, deja vu, you've seen this before. That's the risk they're running.
That's going to be the biggest thing I'm wondering, because I guess maybe it appears with Ed Policy, that group, they pretty much are saying injuries derailed everything. That's basically what I take it as. If the offensive line stayed intact, maybe that group would have been better. And Micah Parsons, obviously the group still would have been good with Micah Parsons, but basically they're putting it all on injuries. And you get to a point where that's just so hard to do, especially because, I mean, I wasn't here in 2010. And actually, I was doing my research, Spoon. I found one of your stories about 15 guys that were on injured reserve, more than 30 guys who had played in at least one game, missed the game, or that at least started, missed the game due to injury. So, you can weather storms because of injury. So, again, it was just fascinating to see the staff. Go ahead.
Well, and then you have to point to injuries had nothing to do with them blowing the 2 games to Chicago. I mean, they were in position to win both games, and they were better than Chicago on both days until the final 5 minutes of the first game and the fourth quarter of the second. I will point out that the transition from a quarterback doesn't have to take 5 years. I mean, Mike McCarthy had Brett Favre for 2 years, and then within 3 years, won with Aaron Rodgers. So, I don't want to give Matt LaFleur that much of a break because it's been done here before where, a guy transitioned from, a Hall of Famer. You don't know you got a first round pick, but you don't know how good he's going to be. And they won a Super Bowl with him 3 years later. So, the clock is ticking on LaFleur to win a Super Bowl. I guess the part that I didn't have a huge problem with them bringing him back. I mean, if that's a decision they made and they had to assess who was there and who wasn't. But the part that still remains really a question mark in my mind is what's different? What's different about the staff? He's brought in another guy who plays defense pretty much the same way as Hafley, same type of guy, young, or not young, but, kind of a youngish type of coordinator, well thought of, whatever. He hasn't done anything different on defense. He lost one of his best assistants and hasn't replaced him yet. And he did nothing on special teams. And so I don't know. I don't see where the culture of the team that they've been has changed. And so we'll see. That'll be a huge thing, I think, going into next year is how do they, what tells you that they're going to be a better team?
Spoon, I think the reason why that your point on the injuries had nothing to do with those games in Chicago, which to me, that is the point. That is the most important part of any decision-making process in this situation. Because had the Packers closed out 21-3 in the second half, they would have gone to Seattle the next week and lost. The injuries made them not a Super Bowl team this year. They're not winning the Super Bowl. They're not getting the Super Bowl without Micah Parsons. But 2026 is as Super Bowl or bust as Super Bowl or bust can possibly be. Like, that is the only thing that 2026 will be based on. And if the collapse in Chicago was so jarring because of what it might mean for 2026, because you don't just get to a Super Bowl without facing adversity. You don't get to a Super Bowl without closing games off. If you're going to run it back after that, you are then going into a Super Bowl or bust year with the uncertainty of, can you handle adversity and close out games you're supposed to win to make that type of run? And that is a huge open-ended question after what happened in Chicago. It matters for 2026 more than it did for 2025.
That's the big question too, and you both have alluded to it, of what's going to look different. You see all these mistakes, you see all the things that have happened, and it was fascinating watching the Super Bowl because you watch the Seahawks, like that was championship level football. They didn't have penalties. They didn't have mistakes on special teams. When it was time to go make a play, they did that. And they didn't play perfect by no means, but they played clean football. That's something that I'm wondering about with this Packers group and playing smart assignment football. And like you said, if this is the same staff coaching these guys up, again, we'll see what happens in 2026. So as far as just with Gutekunst, I mean, he talked for nearly 40 minutes, and there's a lot that came from it in terms of, more than anything, his facial expressions. I mean, he was frustrated. He was very frustrated when he talked about the finishes, but there's so many different levels to this. And Ryan, I'll let you start it off. What were the big takeaways, or what was just like the big thing that you heard from him that really just kind of caught your attention? Because I have a few myself.
Before I was going to say, before I answer that, I think that we would all agree that same press conference 1 year earlier, coming out of the 24 season, the exit press conference with Brian Gutekunst, the thing that stood out was at the very end, Brian Gutekunst saying it's time to compete for championships. Like that is where they're at, right? We all took that as the number one takeaway. What was your guys' number one take? Because I have mine, but I'm curious if it's the same that you guys took away this year. I'm curious if it's going to be in unison or if we took different things.
Ooh, you started, Spoon, because I don't know.
I don't really have one. I really don't.
Yeah.
There was nothing. Okay. I didn't take much out of that, other than, to me, it seemed like, status quo was okay, and they've got to get better at the end of games. That was the theme, that they have to get better at games. I kind of felt like he put it on the coaching staff more than he did on himself, and that they got to be better in that area. That would be what I took from it.
I think that was what I got too. It was more on the players than the coaches, because one comment that he made, he said, you need to quit worrying about where you think you should play. Just wherever you go on the field, you should play. That was something that really, of course, like Jordan Morgan was watching the pressure like, oh, okay. Or maybe even a Keyshawn Nixon, right? He didn't want to return kicks because he was CB1. So I thought about that issue. He talked about the finishes, and, he felt like the personnel is there. They have all they need for special teams. Those were kind of my big takeaways.
When he said losing 5 straight games, we haven't made a decision on anyone, that was about as strong as a ticked off statement I've ever heard from this GM. He was deeply upset that how the season ended. First question he got was from me. He sits down and I said, have you digested 21-3? And he's just like, not well. That is a very frustrated GM. Where does that frustration come from? To your point, Spoon, I completely agree with you. I think that he feels like he did his job to the level that this should have been a Super Bowl year. When he says the injuries were not the reason we lost those games, we had everything that we needed to win those games, he was not in a place where, in his evaluation of what went wrong, he thought it was injuries. Now, I tend to think that the injuries were more impactful than maybe he let on, but he thought that his job is to build the roster, a Super Bowl caliber roster. And without the injuries, I think he did that. At the same time, his big project before Micah Parsons last offseason was the offensive line. And that was a colossal failure. I mean, it could not have failed possibly more than it did. It was bad all year. He talked about how the last 4 or 5 years they've paid more attention and valued special teams, prioritized special teams than ever before, ever during the Ted Thompson era. Well, that's fine, but you also never had return specialists, or at least return specialists that you could use, because you let Keyshawn Nixon say that he's not going to be a return specialist. So even if you're prioritizing more, you're not prioritizing it to the point of filling every spot on your roster. So it's kind of like painting 3/4 of a house, but leaving one wall unfinished. Like you got to paint the whole thing, and then you prioritize it to the point that you need to. So I don't want to let Brian Gutekunst off the hook, but I also think that I can see where he feels like, my God, this was a team that should have won a lot more than it did. It was built to do that. It had the talent to do that, and it didn't. I get the frustration.
Go ahead, Spo. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to let him off the hook either. He tried to defend their cornerback play, and that was, that's right there for everybody to see how bad that was. When you got two guys who give up responsible for 13 touchdowns or whatever it is, I mean, that's bad play. That's bad cornerback play. And to, not identify that as a need is not realistic. And I do think what he was saying was, I think he was putting it to some degree on coaching, and that they have to be better. Okay, if a guy has to play a different position he doesn't want to play, then the coaches have to figure that stuff out, how to get the most out of that guy. I think he said, didn't he say if they would have put Jordan Morgan at left tackle at the beginning of training camp, he thinks he would have been the starter?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he talked about it. Yeah,
right? That was him saying that he thought Jordan Morgan should be the starter going into week 1.
Yeah, and that's a shot at the coaches, because they never did really give him a chance to compete at left tackle. And so I would have been really interested when the three of those guys met at Kohler American Club, when they started talking about, so what's your staff going to look like? And everybody, and LaFleur is saying, I'm bringing everybody back, and he's in charge of the coaching staff. And that was a thing, Ed Policy kept everything the same. So LaFleur is in charge of the coaching staff. And so this now falls on him. And, if it doesn't come through next year, then, then what do they do?
Yeah, that's something that, again, it's so fascinating to me. And so I guess we can touch on the staff a little bit, at least the new faces and some of the new additions. And, well, it's very easy offensively. So I guess we can just talk about that one before we talk into a lot of the defensive guys. Noah Pauley, who, of course, he kind of climbed up the ranks in the college world. He was rumored to talk to some NFL teams looking at making the jump. I think the 49ers interviewed him last year for a role offensively. He was going to be at Penn State, but now he's with the Packers. And, of course, he coached Christian Watson in college. So, I guess what do you kind of I'll start with you, Ryan, just, thoughts on that move and just kind of the offensive moves as a whole with Sean Mannion heading to Philly, just thoughts on offensively and I guess thoughts on it.
Well, I want to hear more from Spoon on the coaching staff than myself, so I'll be quick on this. But let me give you an anecdote about how close Noah Pauley is to Christian Watson, because that's a great addition for Christian Watson. They his position coach in college, but they stay close after college, to the point that you guys remember the game that kind of was the first big game of Christian Watson's career, Dallas in 2022. That morning, Christian Watson woke up on game day and texted Noah Pauley that he was feeling really good about having a good game that day because he was finally moved to the X position, which is what he played at North Dakota State. And Noah Pauley, when he got that text, I did a story in 2022 on Christian Watson, spoke with Noah Pauley, and he told me that he knew right there that he was going to be okay. Like he was about to go off because it's getting back into his comfort zone. But I find that very interesting that was the guy that's how close they are. He texted him the morning of that game, and they had continued to be in communication. I think that to me, when you have Christian Watson, who really established himself starting in New York last year as the legitimate wide receiver one, he was that down the stretch. He's the closest thing that they've had since Devontae Adams to being that true number one target, the number one receiver. You want to make him as comfortable as possible. You want that to continue. They got the right guy for that.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing I thought about. Not only that, but I mean, he's earned a reputation of developing guys and doing a good job coaching them. What the two young guys with the Houston Texans right now, he had at Ohio State, Jaden and Jalen Noel. So again, he kind of has that resume. Spoon, just thoughts on Paulie, Mannion, just the kind of offensive group.
Well, the receiver coach position is, I don't want to downplay it, but it's a, I didn't think they had a ton of problems with their wide receivers, and Jason Vrabel basically is the wide receivers coach. I mean, when you see him on the field, all the wide receivers are gathered around him most of the time, and he's talking to them. I don't know how good a coach Noah Paulie is. You're right. He did develop those two guys at Iowa State, and he's, he has, from what I've read, a good reputation. But I don't know if that's going to be a huge deal. How much input he'll have on the offense itself. Mannion, I think, is a huge loss. In obviously. A Super Bowl winning coach thought he was good enough after 1 year or 2 years, 1 year as quarterbacks coach, to call plays for him and be offensive coordinator. So there's talent there, and I read a story about there were a bunch of guys at the Super Bowl who worked with him and talked about him, and he's, I guess, really a kind of a football savant. And the thing that I wonder is, could LaFleur have done something to keep him? LaFleur could have given up calling plays. I don't know if that would have been in his best interest. That's what he does really well, or, he's good at it. But would there have been some way he could have kept Mannion? Make him the offensive coordinator, assistant head coach, or something. Pay him a ton of money and say, hey, after, just stay 1 more year, and you'll have opportunities after this, and we'll pay you, and just stick with us 1 more year. Maybe you can win a Super Bowl here. So I wonder about that. Why they didn't, how hard they worked to try to keep him. Because I think he was an up-and-coming guy on their staff. Otherwise, offensive line coach is the same, offensive coordinator is the same. We'll see who Seattle hires to replace Clint Kubiak, but I don't think Stenovich might get an interview there, but I don't know if they would hire him to call plays. We'll see how that pans out. I just don't see a ton of change there.
The thing with Sean Mannion, and I in no way want to downplay his departure, but the thought that I have, it's very similar to having a receiver coach on the same staff with Jason Vrabel. Like, you're absolutely right. Jason Vrabel is the overseer of receivers. He is, even as offensive passing game coordinator, he works most directly, the former Packers receiver coach that got elevated in that spot, with receivers. Yeah, I'm sure that Sean Mannion is very talented. Obviously, Nick Sirianni was very impressed. I'm sure that he did great things for not just Jordan Love, but Malik Willis as well. So long as Matt LaFleur is on the staff, he is most responsible for the quarterback play. That is his biggest project. Like, he is chief among who develops Jordan Love, and I think Malik Willis too. So I do think that they'll be okay there because they have Matt LaFleur, and that is something he does very, very well. But also, yeah, I hear what you're saying as far as talented coach, you don't want to lose.
Yeah. Now let's talk defense, because it starts from the defensive coordinator, which is no surprise. Not only when Jeff Hafley leaving to go to Miami, you knew he would bring some of his guys like, Sean Dugan, and some of the guys. Ryan Downer is another guy. Not Downing. He brought with him as well. And just kind of looking at the Packers, Jonathan Gannon as defensive coordinator, as we talked about, Bobby Babbage Sam Sifkis, Daniel Bullocks. I'm probably butchering all of these names, so I'll have them right by the time we get into training camp. But those are kind of a lot of the big moves there. And then it looks like DeMarcus Covington remains on staff as well. Spoon, what do you kind of make of some of the moves defensively? But also I want to touch on the story that you wrote about the scheme and how things could maybe look, whether it's 3-4, 4-3, and so forth.
Yeah, so, they brought in Jonathan Gannon, who's going to run a different system than Jeff Hafley, but he's multiple enough that he can run 4-3, he can run 3-4. He's probably going to run both. The guys he brought with him, he wasn't able to bring Nick Rallis, who was his defensive coordinator and was actually the guy calling plays last year in Arizona. He's still under contract in Arizona, and I'm assuming Mike LaFleur is keeping him. They got rid of Derek Ansley, and there was some. I think we saw some things in the secondary that maybe did warrant a change there. Especially the cornerback play was not very good. The safety play was fine. Ryan Downard, I think, handled the safeties more than anybody, and now he's gone. I don't know that much about Daniel Bullocks. He's got a lot of experience. He's an ex-player. I always think it's good to have ex-players on your staff. I don't think everybody has to be an ex-player, but I think, some of what really helps is when these guys, you have someone who can relate to the players, who's actually played the game. And I think that's where Sean Mannion was a real great addition, was because he had played the game for so long and seen so many different things for so many different teams playing on different offenses. And I think that was a real bonus for him with those quarterbacks. But defensively, I think it's going to be different, but it's going to be the same. They're not going to be a blitzing team. They're not. People are going to want them to be, sending guys right and left. No, Gannon blitzes about the same percentage amount that Hafley has during his tenure. They're gonna highlight the three safeties. That was a big thing for him in Arizona. So they're gonna make sure they get Bullard and McKinney and Evan Williams on the field a lot. That's probably a good thing. I think Nate Hobbs, I think there's a reason to bring him back because of the scheme, that he's a good fit in that scheme. So we'll see what they do if they do indeed bring him back. And then we'll see what he does with Micah Parsons. He's got some interesting things that he does. He does a lot of things to disguise coverages. He does a lot of things. He can be 3-4, 4-3. He's very multiple, much more than Jeff Hafley, who was pretty standard with what he did. You knew he was rushing 4. You knew he's going with nickel defense almost all the time, never played dime. So it'll be a little bit different.
Yeah. That's something that I'm curious about with Gannon, and you talked about the system, and at least from his resume, he usually doesn't, you can say, screw up when he has talent. When he was with the Eagles, what they had 70 sacks, the Super Bowl season, and guys played well. So again, he's walking into a situation where he has one of the best edge rushers in the game, really talented safeties. Yeah, you're going to have to, do some work in the corner room, but again, he's not given something. He doesn't have a huge project to work on. Ryan, just, any thoughts or anything you want to touch on defensively?
The thing that stands out to me the most is being able to be creative in maximizing the safety play, which can be difficult in this league because there's a reason why the market undervalues safety. They're among positions some of the lesser impactful. Right? The corner is more impactful than the safety, but on this roster, their talent is at safety. I think that Evan Williams is probably, of all the players, the gap between public perception of who they were in 25 and who they actually were in 2025, he has the biggest net gain there. he was essentially as good as Xavier McKinney last year. I think he can be even better next year. For you to be able to maximize what you have in Arizona, what they had at times, they would have 5 safeties on the field. Like they were really creative with their safety usage. To maximize that position and the impact is only good things for this defense because they were stellar at safety this past season. The blitzing, to me, that's what they want. They want to be able to get after you with 4, drop 7. That's what they're built to do with Micah Parsons. If he stays healthy, they should be able to do that. We saw with a healthy Micah Parsons, their pass rush was game-changing in terms of how offenses approach them, all the checkdowns, the lack of explosive plays, and still getting pressure because you've got Mike Parsons and DeMonte Wyatt. I think that falls in line with what they're looking for. It's clear that Matt LaFleur highly values head coaching experience in the defensive coordinator spot. The defensive coordinator essentially is the head coach of the Packers defense because Matt LaFleur is the play caller on offense. He wants to develop quarterbacks. He wants to caretake that side of the ball. He does not want to have to worry about the defensive side. So, former head coach, go be the head coach of the Packers defense. If it goes well, and there's every reason to think it could go well, this is a job where Jonathan Gannon could get a second head coaching opportunity. When Jeff Hafley got here 2 years ago, because of the responsibility on the defense that this position has, if it goes really well, I'm thinking then be a head coach if he plays his cards right. 2 years later, he's in Miami. Jonathan Gannon will have the same opportunity, but there's no way for us to know right now how this is going to go. It'd be complete guesswork. I think there's a lot to like, but that doesn't mean that it will play that way on the field. We'll have to see.
Exactly. As we kind of wrap this up, I do want to touch on, looking ahead. They still have free agency coming up here, probably within the next 3 to 4 weeks. Coming early March. You'll have the NFL Combine. Then obviously you have the draft, which will be a very quiet, chill first round in Green Bay. But as far as with free agency, there were several names that came up during the Brian Gutekunst press conference, and even just some guys that I was curious about. And I even wrote some of those names down: Rashawn Gary, Brandon McManus, Elton Jenkins, Aaron Banks, Nate Hobbs, and I'm sure I'm probably even forgetting some guys. For both of you, are there any players like that? I guess you could throw in Romeo Doubs as well. Are there any players that you're curious about as far as what extensions or, do they move on? Or, I'll start with you, Spoon. Are there any players or anything that you're, thinking about as far as free agency?
Well, all of them. I mean, there's a lot of talented guys on there that they've got to figure out what to do with. They got unrestricted guys like Quay Walker, Romeo Doubs, Sean Ryan. Those are all significant players. I would think that Quay Walker is their priority, but I am willing to bet that he's going to get more money than they're willing to pay. And I'll be surprised if they re-sign him. I think Dobbs is probably the same boat. I think Sean Ryan, they got a shot at re-signing him. I don't know what they're going to do in terms of cutting guys. I think Elton Jenkins probably will be released. I think they need his cap money. I don't know about Rashawn Gary. That's a coin flip for me, because on the one hand, and Gutekunst was right when he talked about, Gary had a ton of pressures, but he just didn't have any sacks. And so they have to figure out why that was. And was it because, he's just kind of losing it? And this is, the last bit of flame you see from him? Or was there something with the system that just didn't get him to the quarterback? I don't know. But he's not a terrible player. He just didn't have an impact for a $25 million a year guy. I think Hobbs and Banks will both be back. I think they both had reasons. We could go into a much deeper into both those guys as to what happened during their seasons, but I'd be surprised if they're let go. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else who would be released, if I'm forgetting anybody. But that's pretty much, we'll see. It's a lot of it comes down to how much these guys want.
Yeah. With Aaron Banks, they're just not saving that much on cap. It's like $4.5 million. Right. So he's got to play better. He was bad. He was just flat out bad. But the injuries were lingering, and as Brian Gutekunst said, he'd never really had significant injuries before. Picked a bad time for the Packers to have his first injury-riddled season, and I don't know what the evaluation is there. I mean, the reality is he was on the field a lot and it was really bad. And he did get a little bit better later in the year. But for the most part, it was really bad. So, but there's not a lot of cap savings there.
Which is strange because he wasn't a bad player for 3 years in San Francisco. No. So what was the difference? What happened? They got to really evaluate that.
Yeah, you got to think that the injuries because of that reason, had something to do with it. But it better had something to do with it, because if not, you're in a world of hurt there. The play was not near good enough. The thing with Rashawn Gary that I just was not prepared for when I went through the grades and the film and all that, he had 53 total pressures last year. And I counted them all up, and let's be clear, pressures are subjective, right? I mean, that's it's not like a rushing yard or, it's not an objective measurement, but 53 total pressures. I'm like, there's no way that's right. There's no way. And then Brian Gutekunst says he had 60-some pressures. And I'm like, oh, okay. It's you're in the ballpark there. He had 32 pressures after his final sack in Pittsburgh. 24 hurries and 8 quarterback hits. He was getting pressure. There's a gap between being close and being there that was absent with him. Why was that? He was not finishing those pressures with sacks, but he was getting pressured. So that's something that the Packers are really going to have to dig into and understand why that is. But 53 pressures is nothing to sneeze at. That's a solid. It's a better season than you might have anticipated. Certainly, I anticipated to see from him. I think Sean Ryan of the upcoming free agents is just, to me, the easiest one to make a decision on. I don't think he's going to cost a lot. I think that there's a very high floor there for him at center. I think that they established that he's got the brute force strength, the hand strength. If someone's in front of him, they found something in the running game when they put Sean Ryan there. When you're flanked by guards, the weakness of his game and pass protection is better shielded against. And again, that's a position where you want a high floor and not have to pay that much. Like, that's Sean Ryan. So that one to me makes a lot of sense, just to stabilize the center of that offensive line. Quay Walker is the hardest one for me to make a determination on, because the things that Quay Walker does well, he does at like a borderline all-pro level. We're talking about his sideline-to-sideline range against the run, his run blitzes, the way he shoots the gaps, tremendous size and speed. And he adds something as a pass rusher from the Mike position as well, and he has done that for a couple of years. The things that he does poorly are so poorly, they're borderline unplayable. His coverage this past season didn't start off bad, but by the third time that Quay Walker lined up against Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson, they realized this Mike has no spatial awareness behind him. And especially in that second half of the playoff loss, they hammered him in coverage relentlessly and did not stop, which was a massive reason for the loss. So, when you look at what they did with Isaiah McDuffie, similar, not as talented, but similar linebacker, they were able to protect Isaiah McDuffie much more in coverage this past season than they did before that. Can they do the same with Quay Walker? It's really hard if you play Mike, because that's a big part of the job at Mike, is you got to be able to cover. Can they do that? Or if they can't, I don't know how you resign him despite the strengths, because that coverage was such a problem. You can't have that at the Mike position. So that's what I'm going to be very curious about once it comes to not just how the Packers evaluate that, but the market itself.
Yeah, I do wonder that as well, because I think about the one game when Isaiah McDuffie played at Mike linebacker. He had an interception, and he played really well, you could say, on the green dot. So I'm wondering how they might think of that and how they might shuffle things around. Maybe it depends on if they think Tyron Hopper could be a good guy and ready to take a next step. There's a lot there that I'm curious about. But honestly, when I look at some of those players, maybe Sean Ryan might be my top priority. because of the offensive line and at center. So I
not
don't know.
expensive. He's not expensive. Like, I don't think the market's going to be crazy for him. So that
yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how this all trickles out. So when you look at, I guess as we kind of wrap it up, when you think about free agency / draft, obviously this draft, the next 2 drafts will be a little different for the Packers. But if you look at position groups that if they could really target them and prioritize them, what position groups really come to mind? Maybe 2 or 3, and either you guys can start it.
I guess, corner, of course. Corner, they could use a run-stopping defensive lineman, and I think they got to keep building depth on the offensive line. And, I think it helps to have some guys with a little bit of experience on the offensive line instead of having all rookies. And so if they can get a guy who's not a high-priced offensive lineman, but can bring him in to at least compete, maybe make him compete at guard or center, then I think that would be ideal.
Yeah, it's corner and defensive tackle, and whatever day 2, the position run and the positional strength that either of those 2 are better, then I imagine that they end up going there. The thing with defensive tackle, I think they have their run stopper in Kobe Wood, and what they don't have is a Kenny Clark replacement. And without that, they don't have that second all down defensive tackle that Devontae Wyatt is, that Kenny Clark was. Kobe Wooden's not that. He had a really good season against the run. He's not going to give you much passing situations. It's tough to have him on the field. Carl Brooks had a disappointing season, has had some pass rush flash before, but he's going to be a rotational situational guy. They don't have that second all down defensive tackle. And at corner, Spoon, it sounded like, so I asked Ryan Gutekunst if he thought they needed wholesale change there. I was really curious how he evaluated the position. And what he told me, and I'm curious what you thought of his evaluation, but what he told me in his answer was that he feels like Keyshawn Nixon is a starting caliber corner. They need to find another starting caliber corner. And the way to do that, he thinks, is by bringing in depth for competition. Hopefully that competition brings another starting caliber corner opposite of Keyshawn Nixon. Do you think that's good enough?
If they draft somebody in second to third round, then it might be. I mean, Keyshawn Nixon can be a starter. I think that's not a problem. I think I would have given up on Carrington Valentine based on his season. I just, I don't know. I suppose you can bring him back to camp and let him compete, but I wouldn't trust him. They don't, I really liked Kamal Hadden until he got hurt, and I just can't see that injury was so bad. I don't know if we'll see him back. They're just, what happened with Trayvon Diggs, I don't know. I'd certainly like, when we get a shot at Matt LaFleur, I'd like to ask him again about that, because he didn't I don't think he got asked about that in his final press conference. They have to add bodies. They have to add some competition. And right now they don't, I am much higher on Hobbs than many people are, and only because I thought he played really well when he was healthy. When he got healthy in that first Bears game, he played really well. But I don't know if he can stay healthy. So that's a big if. You can't bank on guys who get hurt a lot. So, I would bring him back. I'd bring Nixon back. Valentine, okay, fine, you can bring him back. But they've got to add people to that room, and they've got to add some talent, some really physical talent into that room.
Yeah, I think that Nate Hobbs can factor into the depth for competition purposes. I mean, he gave up his 2, but I think that he's worth giving that second chance to. Carrington Valentine tackles like a cover corner, but he doesn't cover like one. And that's a big problem. I think Keyshawn Nixon is a starting caliber corner in this for a championship caliber defense in this league. He's not a number one in that scenario, right? If you want to have a title winning defense, he's not a number one. He is a starter. And why that matters is because let's think about the path to the NFC through the NFC next year. You've got Jackson Smith and Jimba. You've got Amon-Ra St. Brown. You've got Puka Nacua. You've got some elite receivers that you're going to have to encounter. If you're going to make a Super Bowl run, you better be better at corner than they are right now. I think that to me is the reason why that's the number one area of needing to add talent, even more than defensive tackle. But there's some pieces there. I agree. Wholesale change is not where they're at, but they're not that far from it either. They need to find a starter.
Yeah, that's what stood out to me watching that Super Bowl. Just watching how aggressive the corners played.
Yeah,
how they were just ball hawks.
Man.
Yeah, how they tackled and they were just ferocious the way they attacked the ball and they attacked defenders. And I'm watching the game and I'm just sitting there. I'm like, man, you just did not see that in Green Bay. You saw it some with Keyshawn. I'm not going to just say he was just horrible. Like he tackled well and he had some good moments, but also there were just some of those missed assignments where he just gets juked by a receiver and gets lost. And you just didn't see a lot of that from some of the really big time groups like the Patriots, like the Seahawks. So I think that's going to be a big priority for this group because you just can't always count on Michael Parsons to disrupt and get back to the quarterback and create all those pressures. You need some guys that can get some takeaways as well. One between Nixon, Valentine, Hobbs, whoever else, just one interception. I'm pretty sure in the game against the Bears. I don't know. It's going to be very fascinating how they.
Harrington Valentine had a pick and they lost.
Oh yeah.
29 yards on it because it was a fourth down.
Which he should have dropped. Yeah, that's right.
I think they got to get back to getting Xavier McKinney back to the guy he was when, the guy he was 2 years ago when he was an All-Pro. I think they messed around a little too much with him near the box, putting him up in the box more than they had before. He's going to be a deep safety for Gannon. Gannon is going to want him to be back playing deep. He'll have Bullard and Evan Williams back there, but he's got to get back to doing what he did best because he didn't really have that great a season. He gave up some plays that I don't remember him giving up the year before and didn't have the interceptions that he should have. Something was just off with him last year, and they got to get him back to playing. He's not a bad player. He just, I don't know what it was. I mean, maybe that's why Ansley's not there anymore because they weren't happy with how he played, but somehow they got to get him back.
Yeah. So that's no question about it. So guys, any final words, final thoughts, anything that you got to say before we wrap up this podcast?
No, I guess it's 2026 now, right? It's a new season. Starts right away.
Super Bowl or bust.
Super Bowl's
day
over.
after the Super Bowl, it's going to be Super Bowl or bust for the next year, and we'll see what this franchise does.
Yeah. There'll be a lot of heat on if they don't have the kind of year that they want. That's going to be an interesting dynamic. The fans are going to be impatient, I think.
Oh, yeah. And I guess it doesn't help when all these young guys keep winning Super Bowls as well, like the Mike McDonald of the world, the third youngest coach ever and hasn't been a head coach that long as well. So, yeah, it does. It makes you wonder. Did you guys enjoy the Super Bowl at all?
Not even a little bit.
Only
the halftime show was great. Bad Bunny was phenomenal. That was the only real positive from that experience because I thought that was one of the worst, the most boring, uncompetitive, railroaded by one team Super Bowls I have seen.
Yeah, it was a shame. I expected better, but, it kind of shows the NFC was sort of the dominant conference, I think. And the best team came out of the NFC, and it was far better than the best team in the AFC by a lot. I think the Rams could have beaten the Patriots, and maybe the Bears could have even beaten the Patriots. I don't know, but the NFC was definitely the king of the NFL this year.
That's true. Yeah, I didn't really enjoy much of anything. The anthem, even, it was okay. Too much auto-tune. Bad Bunny was good. There's only one commercial I liked. That was the Dunkin' Donuts commercial. That was the only one I liked. I can't
I
think
thought
of any
the
other
Jason
commercial.
Kelce meh commercial was really subtly catchy. Like that one just it was simple, but like, I don't know, the idea of like most of this is maybe way too fatalistic of me. We're revealing my character here, but the idea that like most of things in life are just meh, including the Packers season in 2025, like, yeah, that's about right. Like most things are really just meh.
Yeah, that's very accurate.
There's truth in that, you know?
There were too many AI commercials. My God.
I know it.
About AI.
I know
it.
it. So,
you know, the thought that I had is, one, the Packers, I imagine, were feeling pretty ill watching this because you got two teams that came from nowhere this season. The Seahawks turned out to be obviously very good, but two teams, like, this was the type of year where you execute the type of trade that they did for Micah Parsons. It was actually wide open. It was there for the taking, and they did not take it. But nobody possibly could be more sick than the Buffalo Bills, than Josh Allen. For that to be the AFC representative, and I know that there was some bad luck there because it was at the end of the Bills game that Bo Nix breaks his ankle, and then he doesn't play the AFC Championship game. Probably the Broncos end up winning at home if Bo Nix plays, so it's not really representative of reality. But if this wasn't the year for the Bills with Josh Allen, that has to be a really, really tough kick in the gut.
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, the only thing that I regret from the entire Super Bowl and this season is that I didn't pay attention enough in Spanish class, but I did enjoy Bad Bunny. That's all I got. So, guys, this is a great way to end this and break down this podcast. It was a lot. We talked for about an hour, but hey, we haven't talked since Chicago, and there's been a lot of news over the last month or so. And so we can check back in again soon. And again, check out Ryan's grades. They just dropped on this Monday. They'll be going for the next week or so. So every position, 2 weeks. Yeah, every position, all type of grades analysis, and then we'll hop back on here and break that down. And Spoon, you just continue being great. That's all I got for you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, guys, thank you all so much for everything. And thank you for checking out the Green 19 podcast. For Ryan Wood, Tom Silverstein, I'm Dominique Yates.